Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We are a proud member of the Social Suplex Podcast Network, and you can find our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex Podcast feed, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. It is Sunday, August 4th, 2024, and we are kicking things off today with the news that the TKO UFC lawsuit that is about fighter pay has had its the settlement that the two parties agreed on has been rejected by the judge. Okay, so UFC, which is now TKO, was sued in 2014 for antitrust business practices. This is where they work to suppress wages and minimize competition so that the fighters got a smaller share of pay than they would have otherwise. UFC fighters get approximately 17 to 20% of the fight revenue. So all of UFC's fight revenue that they get, the fighters get 17 to 20%, which seems great until you realize that the NBA players get 50% of the NFL revenue in salaries, NFL's 48%, and the NHL is 54%. Excuse me, I said NHL and I mean MLB. So this case was certified as a class action lawsuit back in 2017, and it covers about 1,200 fighters who fought for the UFC between the year 2010 and 2017. So if you fought for, so a class action lawsuit in the United States essentially means that it's a large group of people who don't necessarily have to do anything other than sign a piece of paper saying that they agree to the class action lawsuit, and they can get a settlement. A lot of Americans will have this if they've had, like, for example, like a credit card issue. I had one for a company I worked for. We basically say, yes, I agree to waive my rights to follow any own litigation on my own on this, and the lawyers go through the whole thing, and then at the end of it, you get a check. In some cases, the check is for $1.50, and in some cases, significantly more. In this case, with the 1,200 fighters, the varying possibilities of what they could get out of this would be based around what their income and earnings were during that 2010 to 2017 time period. So the two sides had been involved in this lawsuit since 2014, but they reached an agreement in the spring of this year to settle for $335 million. TKO was going to pay that to the fighters, and about $100 million would go to the lawyers, about $225 in varying different amounts would go to the fighters. But the judge, Richard Boulwar II, rejected the deal because he said it was not in the fighters' best interest. And this is extremely rare. It doesn't happen very often where two sides agree to a deal. And the judge, in all U.S. court cases, if the two sides agree to a deal, the judge has to agree to it as well and has to say yes. But in this case, the judge was like, no, this doesn't work. And part of it was that the judge is the only person who's heard all the evidence in this case. This is not a jury trial. At this point, it's all preliminary evidence. And at one point, he'd heard evidence from an expert that said that the fighters were owed around $800 million to $1.6 billion, would have been what they would have earned if the UFC had allowed greater fairness in the way that they had set up their contracts. This could be triple this amount, this $1.6 billion, if the judge feels that the UFC actively attempted to violate antitrust laws, right? So this is like a lot of money and a big deal, and this is like kind of a shock to everyone involved. The Observer pointed out that the fighter pay could go from someplace like $73,000 with this current settlement, and the top 500 fighters would get in excess of $100,000. Like Brock Lesnar, who's one of the highest paid fighters in this lawsuit, would get $2 million just for his fight with Mark Hunt at UFC 200. Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey would get additional millions of dollars. So putting this in context, I think, is really important in terms of how much UFC fighters make compared to, say, for example, boxing. Floyd Mayweather is one of the highest paid, I believe he is the highest paid boxer of all time. He was paid $275 million for one fight in 2017. Conor McGregor is the highest paid UFC fighter of all of UFC's history, and he has made $20 million in his entire career in UFC. So there's a huge disparity in pay between what athletes can make in other, obviously unionized places, where in the UFC they just don't make that much money. So Trish, this is kind of a bombshell to TKO and sets off a lot of potential issues for them and even WWE. Were you kind of surprised that we ended up here with the judge refusing the settlement?
I think we've seen that kind of come in for a few weeks. I think the initial surprise was when they kind of indicated that they weren't going to accept the settlement. The big thing is that we're still waiting for the judge's remarks. So we don't know kind of how much of a settlement that the judge is going to recommend. So how much money could they settle for that he would accept and then would allow it to go through. Trial is it's complicated. So if this goes to trial, the plaintiffs, they run the risk of, if one juror decides that the case isn't worthy of settlement, then the whole thing falls through. So you don't need, it's not a majority, you need every single person on that jury in a federal case to get that verdict. So that one is a huge, huge risk. You're also going to have a risk that even if they were awarded the verdict, that it would be appealed, and then you would likely have a lower settlement agreed after that. And it's time. So we are how many months from your election now?
Oh, God. 1, 2, 3 months.
Okay. So 3 months from the US election, if Donald Trump returns to the White House, the likelihood that officials in his government would be more willing to help TKO is very high. You know, we've seen Dana White just at the RNC convention last week, 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
So there are strong connections between Republicans who would be within that administration and TKO. And also the Supreme Court is very much more friendlier to businesses in these sorts of scenarios. So there are huge, huge risks for the fighters to continue with this case at trial. But there's also, there's huge risks to TKO and to WWE. So the original settlement of $335 million was welcomed by their shareholders. It would mean quarterly kind of damage for the next couple of years, but it was something that they could actually manage quite easily and wouldn't affect changes to their contracts, which is probably what they want more. They want to protect their contracts from becoming similar to what we spoke about with, MLB, NHL, NBA, etc. So they want to continue to have that kind of advantage. And the big difference, I think, between them and boxing, the reason why they are able to kind of pay in these ways is that, and you see this with WWE to an extent as well, and they're the brand. So you pay for the brand of UFC. Whereas in boxing, you pay for the fighters, right? So if I have, for example, here, if we have someone that goes from Eddie Hearn to Frank Warren or to a different kind of promotional element, people will pay to see that boxer. They'll pay to see Anthony Joshua, for example, even though he's moved from one company to another. They pay for that, whereas in mixed martial arts, they are paying for the brand of UFC rather than the fighter. And that makes a huge difference. And that's what we see with WWE as well. They pay for the brand rather than, this wrestler or that wrestler. The thing for WWE is if this case went to trial and a verdict was found against UFC and TKO, it would open WWE up to the exact same lawsuit, and then you have a precedent. So they could do from 2002 onwards to 2019, where there was no direct competition, and you would have exactly the same thing, and it is likely to win. And they do not want to go to deposition. No. They do not want everything out there.
They don't want to go to discovery. And the other thing to be recognized here is that if UFC pays its fighters 17 to 20% of their revenue, the percentage of revenue that WWE pays their wrestlers is significantly lower than that. I think it's in the single figures or close to the single figures. So that's a big, you're already saying where you have one judge saying 20% is too low, how much you could imagine it would be like this. And I think that it would be very difficult to argue that WWE hasn't behaved in antitrust type ways, which is part of the reason why they settled the MLW lawsuit they had for $20 million.
Yeah, and that was just to stop that one from going to discovery. $20 million just to stop that one going from discovery. So they are very much fearful of that. They are in slightly better position from 2019 onwards because of AEW's existence.
Yes.
That really helps them. And it's also one of the reasons why they continue to work with other companies, to try and kind of negate the antitrust elements. But there would be significant risk if there was, the payments that we talked about up to onwards of $4 billion. That would have a significant impact on their business and would lead to cuts and restrictions. So although this might seem like it's somewhere out there and it's not directly related because it's UFC and TKO, it has the potential to have huge impact on WWE's business, and that is why it's worth us discussing.
Yeah. It is interesting from a Trish talked about the Supreme Court. This is a federal civil case. It could get appealed. It's not a criminal case. Obviously, in the United States, that's different. It could get appealed up to a high level, and this is a case that the Supreme Court could take. The way that the Supreme Court is set up right now, it is not particularly friendly to labor or to employees. It's much more friendly to corporations. So it would be interesting to see if they would allow a giant antitrust lawsuit to move forward at this point in time, or would let a big settlement like this stay on the books. That's that may be the case whether regardless of how the election plays out.
One slightly little thing that I don't think I've seen much kind of look into, but I believe when WWE wrestlers are re-signing, they're re-signing with TKO rather than WWE. Yes. So I do wonder if there is changes to the contract. So one of the second lawsuits, there's actually two lawsuits. There's a Conley lawsuit and a Johnson lawsuit. And the Johnson lawsuit focuses on fighters that were signed to different contracts after the lawsuit was initially filed. That meant that disputes go to arbitration. And I wonder if a similar clause has been added to the WWE ones that have moved to TKO. But that's for someone to look into. It's just a note. Just a note of interest of mine that that is something that's doing. So are they reacting to this and signing them differently to prevent issues with WWE talent in the future? Well, hopefully we'll see some answers on that. But just something to keep an eye on. It's a huge story. We spend lots of times on tiny stories that don't actually mean anything. And this is the biggest threat and biggest story outside of the Vince McMahon lawsuit to WWE. So,
yeah, it's a big one, and it will be interesting to see how it plays out in regards to, payment overall. It seems like a lot has changed with WWE. We talked last episode about decrease in house shows, interacting more with other promotions. It's interesting to see how much of their business has changed in just a short period of time and how much of that might be related to this lawsuit. Oh, I remember the thing I was going to say. One of the things that the original lawsuit that was filed requested was that they wanted a change in the way that UFC made its agreements with fighters. They wanted to decrease the length of contracts and essentially do a bunch of things that would make the contracts less onerous as far as the fighters were concerned. This was not part of the settlement agreement. They did not have a change in that, and that was one of the things, not so much the money, but that particular part of it was also something the judge was kind of like, are you fucking kidding me? So it was something that TKO would not budge on in a settlement offer, but that the judge was like, whatever. And Dana White this past week, you've possibly seen some articles where he's made like some bullshit fucking, pardon my language, comments about the judge, and the judge is out to get him. And he's talking about how he and Lorenzo and the judge all went to the same school, which is true, but it was actually funny because Filthy Tom is like, there's literally only one prestigious private high school in Nevada, so like the entire state. So yes, of course you went there. Like that's where I would have expected you to go. So it's one of those things where again, it's a fairly straightforward right-wing tactic at this point that if you can't debate the case on the merits, you're going to debate the people who were involved and try to insinuate something bad about them. So there you go.
There we go.
Good times. Old school. All right, so that's our TKO UFC lawsuit business practices. Let's move on to our next big TKO WWE story, which is SummerSlam, which happened last night in the beautiful town of Cleveland. I think I really enjoyed all of the retreads of the video music of Cleveland. That was that one viral video. It also reminded me of the 30 Rock Cleveland episode, which I enjoyed. The Cleve, as apparently they like to call it. Hopefully they get that IKEA. And yeah, we had like seven matches last night? I don't know. It has had some interesting reactions to that today. Like, as someone who's kind of outside of the WWE bubble, it seemed as though even the fans were not overwhelmingly impressed. Roman Reigns returned, which I think everybody knew. There were very few surprises on the show. CM Punk losing was probably a big surprise to me, but beyond that, I think it was pretty straightforward. There was no debuts, nothing happened. There was run-ins. It seemed like the end of the SummerSlam Cody solo match was essentially a retread of the end of Cody versus Roman. But, they had a bunch of title changes. But beyond that, not much. Trish, do you feel like a lot happened on SummerSlam last night?
So, I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective because I have not watched this show. I'm not going to pretend I've watched this show.
I've watched some clips.
Okay. I've seen bits and pieces, but yeah, I've not watched it in full. However, I have somebody that has. And so I asked for some feedback, and there is some positive feedback in terms of, their big things is that their storylines have their big moments on their big stage.
Yes.
So that is something that people appreciate, that they know they're going to get something. So if you've been following the Dom Bria Liv stuff, or you've been following the Judgment Day, which, the Judgment Day stuff has been pretty hot all the way around. No matter how insane we think it is, it's hot to that audience. And
you saw my face.
And there was also, the expectation of a title change with Gunther and Damian Priest, and they had, so you had that development, and then also you had the return of Roman Reigns. So it's very easy to follow. It's a lot less convoluted sometimes than how AEW can be, which is not to say you shouldn't have depth in storylines, but sometimes, logic can kind of go out the window. So it's very predictable, but also that's not always the worst thing, was the kind of feedback I got. And, this was a show that did massively well for Livegate. They announced 57,791. The last WrestleTix number was 55,875. I don't think he's put out a final number yet. So it was something that had substantial late interest as well, because it did 5,000 tickets in the last 3 days, which is not unusual for a big show. But it's, it was an interesting one. So from a story perspective and for setting things up going towards WrestleMania, people look at it and go, okay, yeah, it did its job. From a standard of an event, it depends how much you value moments. So Roman Reigns coming back, let's not kid ourselves, is the biggest thing to happen for WWE this year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
As a babyface. So they have tried for near enough a decade now. It's a decade. Yeah. To, after they completely screwed up in 2015, to make this guy their lead babyface. And after that Mega Hill run, they now have him as the lead babyface. Now, the interesting thing on that is that it offers different challenges to some of the things that actually help them to grow. So some of the things that we've pointed out previously is that the top babyfaces have been chasing the world title. Well, now the top babyface isn't going to be in the world title program. He may team with Cody Rhodes, but he's not going to be in that program. He's going to be a program with Solo Sikoa. So automatically, you're going to start getting challenges on that kind of hierarchy. And that can always kind of make things more difficult. So that's going to be interesting to see how they manage. And then, it'd just be interesting to see how he does in that role. And if it really does kind of draw money. And that's the thing. So you can look at it and say, they have the issue with the title. Got very much an issue with this show with dumb baby faces, which is something they absolutely were not doing last year or the year before.
No, they were not.
This was the difference. We pointed to this so many times. The way they were elevating baby faces and then to the world title and then down if need be. They've always played the interference thing. It's what they do. That's a Dave thing, but it's true, isn't it? It is what they do. But it's a case of there were some things they were getting really right, and it was especially with their baby faces who were real money makers. And now, not so much. This was a card where you had, Rhea Ripley 15 minutes later going, I'm going to hit someone with a chair and I'm getting whatever. And you had CM Punk running around with a bracelet or trying to run around with a bracelet in what was a blood feud and now has Seth Rollins doing Seth Rollins things and NXT faces and everything else that you come to expect. And honestly, if you expect anything more, I just wouldn't. But so, when the baby face is too busy getting distracted by a bracelet to actually win a match, then you've made them dumb. And not the first time in a few weeks you made them dumb, to be honest. But there we are.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, by the way, how that bracelet has kind of replaced the world title as the end line for that feud, by the way?
I did not come... I think the funniest thing I saw this morning was somebody saying that now Punk will start to come out with another bracelet in a bag and say it's the real bracelet. Which I cannot take credit for that. I did not come up with that.
So
I read it elsewhere.
Yeah. So is the bracelet now the lineal AEW world title?
That's what Brian Alvarez was. Well, he didn't say the bracelet itself. But he was saying
no, but are we saying it's the bracelet now the AEW lineal world title?
Can I also, can I just say this today? Because I listened to Rich and Joe on Vow, and they were calling it indiscriminately a charm bracelet and a friendship bracelet. And as a woman who knows from bracelets, I just got to tell you, a charm bracelet has things that come off of it that are small, detachable charms, okay? Some of these can be like little kid plastic things, or they can be really fancy gold stuff. The friendship bracelet is a thing that is like, this is the kind of homemade friendship bracelets that we girls have always made. If you were a girl in junior high school, you've made these bracelets. This has become like more of a thing since Taylor Swift has done her tour. Yeah, it's like a big Taylor Swift thing.
Did he get it from AJ and his dog Larry? Or did
no,
he?
A fan gave it to him, Trish.
What?
A fan gave it to him. This is a thing that's been happening in wrestling, and you can see this, like, Orange Cassidy is selling them. He and the Best Friends and Willow were wearing them for a very long time. They were getting them all over the place. A lot of women fans of wrestling are giving these out.
Okay, so... So, hang on a minute, right? So, this blood feud that started with CM Punk copying the Hangman Swerve thing, and I'm never going to let him win a world title because he injured me, which is kind of your job as a wrestler, and Punk then costing Drew McIntyre like 3 world title shots and whatever, has now been reduced to he got a charm bracelet that a fan gave him.
A friendship bracelet, Trish!
Fucking hell, I did it! Fuck's sake!
You did it now!
Right, he got a friendship bracelet that he could have just, from a fan, that he could have just made or got from someone at a Taylor Swift concert. Yeah. And now that's making this babyface completely fucking fake. That's what you're telling me. That's what this story is now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then he's not going to win a world title. He's going to win the bracelet back from AJ and his dog Larry. Sorry, that's just the funniest. It's the funniest written line anyone's ever wrote.
Listen, there are people that could pull off a feud about friendship bracelets and that I would be heavily and aggressively invested in. Okay. Let's not kid ourselves that this is not one of them. Like, part of the problem is like the way this whole thing started and like it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I understand that people are like, it's what the bracelet symbolizes. But like,
they
realistically,
laughed at him. They laughed at him when he said to Seth, it means as much as your wife and child. They laughed at him. Right? Like, at that point, like, did you not look yourself in the mirror and go, this ain't fucking working. I look like a fucking idiot. Like, in my bracelet. Why has Seth got my bracelet on? Like, what are you doing?
Dumb. It's just dumb.
It's not even a Bret Hart story. What's going on?
We're not. Bret Hart didn't do a friendship bracelet story. Shocking. It wasn't a Dynamite. There wasn't a 1, 2, 3 kid match about a friendship bracelet with Bret Hart that we can't steal from. Oh my god. Anyway. Oh my. The Lord God Jesus help us all. But yeah. Needless to say, this match went over like a fart in church. I think I've seen 3 people that liked it, and I don't know what to tell you. Like, a lot of people were disappointed by it. Folks were disappointed by the match itself. They were disappointed over the fact that they sort of shoved Rollins in there, and, you know, he didn't make any sense. It just seemed like it was, you know, not something most folks were excited about, although I'm sure I'll have people being like, it was the greatest match ever. And yeah, it does seem like Drew and Punk are going to continue to feud based on last night, which is fascinating because
instead of a world title, Cena's getting that world title, isn't he? That's where that's going eventually.
You got Roman came in. You got fucking like the number of people that are like, and this is where like again, CM Punk had like a whole thing last week about how he's renegotiating his deal. Everyone, WWE came to him to renegotiate his deal with him because he's doing such an amazing job.
Yep.
His social media numbers are incredible, and so therefore they came to him to try and give him more money. And I totally believe this to be true. I don't think this is fake in any way. And the part that cracked me up absolutely was Dave writing in the Observer. This is actually what's really happening, and not just a ploy that Punk is doing to get more money at a time when his program is hot. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what someone who is getting a program to take advantage of a hot program to get more money would say. Like, come on, guys, come on.
Yeah, because the competition gets bigger now. You know,
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, the whole point of doing this is because he knows Roman's coming back. He knows Cena's coming in. He's dropping further and further and further down the card, and it's a much less opportunity that he's going to have a world title match, unless he goes for the fake world title, the title that Gunther has.
Well, that's the Gunther one seems like the Cena one to me. You know, Cody and The Rock, or you know, and then eventually they could do something with Rock there beating Cody because they were talked about it last year, and then doing Rock Roman because Roman's not going to stake him. But they want a babyface world title run with Roman, surely. You know, that's where their real money is. So, and that's the thing. So there are things that start in this show that you look at and you think these are mistakes. These are things that are taking you away from the things that got you hot. But at the end of the day, they are still going to get the benefit of what they've done for the last 3 years. That's what's going to happen.
They have a giant fucking bag of tricks.
Yep.
Let's not kid ourselves. WWE constantly has a giant bag of tricks that they can pull out and, jingle the keys and make you forget about whatever you're unhappy about.
Look what they've got. So Roman's back now, and he probably wouldn't have been back to the Rumble if they weren't debuting SmackDown on the 13th of September. Yeah, it's moving 13th. Yeah, 13th of September. It's moving to USA, moving earlier because Fox were done with them. So they were going to put them on FS1 and replace them with college football. So they've made the deal to move to USA on the 13th, and that also is in Seattle about 4 weeks before Wrestle Dream, which seems pretty deliberate to me, but hey. So yeah, that's why he's back now. Cena's going to be back for the start of the Netflix era and The Rock and the same sort of thing. And Cena's tour, that will carry them next year. I know there's people that don't want to hear this, but that will carry their numbers all of next year. That Cena thing will be huge. And they will just capitalize on that. And I expect them to try and make as many deals for years going forward off that. And they'll need it because you look at like this year's SummerSlam. So this year's SummerSlam is the most successful US SummerSlam they've ever had. 57,000 they've announced. Yeah. So next year they're doing 2 nights.
Yep.
In replacement for Wrestlemania. So you don't have even SummerSlam as a concept, as a brand, is not WrestleMania. It's not a guarantee of people coming in of the 70, 80, 90,000. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that with a SummerSlam yet.
Nope.
So, in the US. So to have them sort of things is going to be very much important for them to deliver those numbers, because when you start these deals that come with kind of financial kind of site fees and that sort of thing, and you then need to keep performing and keep performing. So they are pretty much guaranteed for the next year, and they'll be trying to make as many deals as possible. And even, and I know that's frustrating to say that even if, you feel like the quality isn't there, they will continue to kind of have great business for the next year and a half. But that is reality. That's reality now. That's where they are. Some of it's you benefit sometimes. You might not be doing everything right, but you benefit from what you did before. And that's where they're at now, especially with this Roman run. You've spent years setting this up, and now you are where you are. So that is kind of where they are.
I do think it's worth noticing that they did not comment last night in the press scrum about the viewership. They talked about They did not. They did not make a comment about whether the viewership, which is usually an indication that they did not have more viewers than last year, because they're very quick to crow about that when they do. So that I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so Peacock is leveling out a little bit, but it's still much higher in this quarter than it will be last year, and especially with the Olympics. So that's where they're saying you take the blame, is that the Olympics are predominantly for streaming, or they're all on Peacock, and how that would impact. But also that should mean, like when they had the NFL playoffs in January, there should be a huge new amount of subscribers who have come in for the Olympics, same as they did for the NFL. So that's an interesting stat that they weren't able to claim. It was an interesting press conference. I know it's caused some strain again.
Minor meltdowns.
Yeah. So
Jesus.
Obviously, some headlines on that. So John Pollock was banned from second time now, where he's not been invited to a press conference after WrestleMania.
He was physically present and was in the press box itself.
Yep. So there was no questions on the lawsuit. There was no questions on the lack of black talent on the pay-per-view, or the recent comments by MVP or contract situation involving him or Bobby Lashley. There was no questions on Logan Paul and Pat McAfee, who both decided to make comments around a Olympic boxer this week, which TKO, this is the thing. So as much as WWE made no statement on this, by the way, on either, there's Sean Ross Sapp has a point where he says that the views aren't of WWE, but it's not a quote, it's just written as a comment. So there has been no official statement. But you look at, we talked earlier about Aaron Rodgers being on Pat McAfee's show, kind of anti-science stuff. You look at Dana White at the RNC. You look at someone like Colby Covington running around UFC making, certain statements that they claim are just for business, but are very much on, across the line. And you're going to see more of this, and it's not acceptable. We've had
It's absolute fucking bullshit.
Yeah, we've got two.
Fucking like make it clear from Trish and myself personally. Like fuck Logan Paul, basically.
Yeah.
Like, and what he said was absolute. What McAfee said was absolute ignorant, transphobic bullshit. That if you agree with him, just like fuck off. Like educate yourself. It's bullshit.
You've got two boxers. Their comments are focused around the Algerian boxer, and they are both women. They have always been women. The Algerian suffers from DSD, which results in XY chromosomes and an increased level of testosterone. She's a woman. And this kind of campaign and this misinformation that is not just, it wasn't just like Paul and McAfee, Elon Musk, who runs Twitter, which is just horrendous, J.K. Rowling. There was other individuals involved as well.
Donald Trump.
Yeah, and this flood of misinformation. So we've got lots of public figures in these kind of organizations who are more than happy to run disinformation. And we see the consequences of disinformation. God, this country is half on fire this weekend as a consequence of disinformation. So I think there has to be a question of how do we hold these people to, not kind of run away with this stuff, and because they're doing it's political gain, right? They all have their reasons for doing it. They're looking for something to kind of make a controversy out of, and it's so dangerous, and to see that, and then you see people talk about babyface companies or good companies and that sort of thing, and it's like, well, how responsible are they for these people that are involved with their companies? And not very seems to be the case. But yeah, it's just hugely disappointing. And they can say, you'd like to see public statements. And that's not to say everybody in WWE shares these views.
No, of course not.
Of course they don't. But it's just so disappointing to continually see these sort of things around wrestling. It's not just wrestling, is it? We're seeing it across culture, but we are seeing it around wrestling. But there's no questions on that either. There's no question on Shane McMahon as well or anything else. So yeah, if you want to be critical, if you with the press conference and with the press, so to speak, I think Brandon Thurston wasn't called on either. I don't believe he was.
No, Brandon Thurston was not called on. John Pollock was not allowed in the room. The VIP cosplayers were there. Obviously, that was very important to get them in there, but
they had, that's crazy, isn't it? But that tells you all you need to know about kind of what they do with their press conferences. And, I think it's difficult. So when it comes to media, we talked about this previously, you've got creatives and that sort of thing mixed in with media, and we just don't have enough journalists or the people who are journalists know that there's no value in attending these things or doing these sort of things. So, yeah, how do we hold people to account continues to be, an outstanding question, I think.
Yeah, it was, it's disappointing, but not unexpected and kind of funny, given that Chris LaGentile was on the Richard Deitch podcast this week talking about how he was happy to have Brandon Thurston ask questions at every scrum. And it's like, oh, hey, here's the scrum that Brandon Thurston's not called on. Dun, dun, dun. So, yeah.
It's funny how that happens.
It's funny how that happens. But, yeah, SummerSlam is summer over, thank goodness. Yeah. Anything else on that topic, Trish, or move along to our next?
No, I think I'm good. We had some fun with the bracelet there.
Oh God, we live in freaking interesting times.
We do.
Okay, so the next topic we threw out here to discuss, which quite frankly I don't even know what the fuck to say about this. Shane McMahon on Wednesday of this past week, July 31st. The Wrestle Talk and Fightful, an alliance for the ages, teamed up on a story about Shane McMahon meeting with Tony Khan at a private airport in the Arlington area. And this was complete with terrifying photo where it looked like Shane McMahon is just almost out of frame, and Tony Khan looks like he's been caught by his mom doing something he shouldn't be doing. Like, it was just like, I was like, what the fuck is even going on here? Like, I don't even know what to tell you. So this, of course, led to all sorts of speculation that Tony Khan is meeting with Shane McMahon, and Shane McMahon's going to come into AEW, and people just like going on and on and on. And God damn it, Trish, I don't even know. I don't even fucking know what to say about this.
Oh boy.
Have fun with this one, girl.
Like, like 10 minutes after it's come out, I saw someone suggest that he could be the face character for Tony Khan against the Elite, and I just turned my computer off. I was like, I'm gonna watch the table tennis. Fuck this. Like, oh my god! I was like, no, fucking no. Where's my table tennis gone?
Look, we have been in desperate need of Dynamite Underground. I think we all agree that would make the show a lot better.
John Moxley Paradise.
Finally, they can bring in Josh Barnett.
Oh no!
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So Shane hasn't been seen actually since the kind of end of that kind of Raw Underground stuff and the Royal Rumble in 2022, where he tried to launch the kind of fake coup to take the company away from Vince, and had some horrendous creative that ended up getting him removed.
That great story about how they mixed up the songs, and he was actually supposed to go out later, and Randy Orton was supposed to go out sooner. And they played Shane's song, and Shane's looking at Randy Orton, and Randy Orton's like, "Fuck you, dude! I'm not going out."
My fucking song. Now you've got to imagine like the big bulky Randy Orton trying to go out and doing like the Shane O'Mac dance. That's it. Like, it
was like peak shit show WWE. Like that really was the end of like shit show WWE.
That really was the peak. That absolutely was. Yeah. But yeah, that was the last time he was kind of seen there. I don't think I have many positive thoughts on this. So, is he worth anything creatively? Probably not. Is he worth anything as a character? I wouldn't think so. Is he worth anything as a rating? Well, maybe this was a rating gimmick. You know, they were even if so. Fightful said that AEW didn't help with their inquiries on this, but they chose to release it on a Wednesday, and I'm sure they were very happy for it to come out on a Wednesday, but it made no difference for them against the Olympics. So, would he spark a 1 week rating? Possibly. Would he do anything more than that? No. Let's be stupid. No. You know, if he's not. Yeah, if Adam Copeland can't, it's just not going to happen, right? No. So, is there anything that's going to help with business dealings? You know, Dave said quite categorically, no, it wouldn't help with that or with TV dealings outside of WBD. So, if that's the case, then what are the benefits of bringing this guy in? You know, it's like, right, so you have a McMahon, so you can use it, so it's like is it just like, I don't know, like a pride thing? Like, hey, yeah, I've got a McMahon working for me. Okay, great, but then there's outstanding questions. So it's like, do you need it? Are you making yourself more of an alternative when you're tying yourself to WWE in this way? You know, that's always an outstanding question. For years, we've been talking about them struggling to kind of figure out their identity. I don't think this helps in that aspect.
No.
So I'm not massively kind of fond of that. Do they need someone else taking up that time? No, they really don't.
No,
Jesus
they don't.
Christ. And there is the outstanding question of, although he's not named in the lawsuit, what does he know about Vince McMahon and the dealings there? What does he know about them culture? He's not, as far as I'm aware, he's not condoned any behavior or said anything else. So would I bring somebody in who's related to that family at this time? Absolutely fucking not. You don't know. If there was a disposition and, you know, if it goes fully to discovery in the McMahon lawsuit, and in the the federal investigation into WWE and other things are pulled up, you could leave yourself in a really bad situation. So for me, it's like, is this a gimmick? You know, we've seen Tony do quite a lot of gimmicks lately. You know, we've seen previous ones with the internet gimmicks around like the hook thing with Jinder Mahal or like Vikingo one, or just throwing out kind of the cold matches for ratings, you know, to swerve a Carter, or this week we just seen Hangman Darby, that sort of thing. You know, they're doing things to kind of pop numbers at the moment while they chase this deal. I think he's in Paris this weekend. He's been at the WBD house, which I gave you some of the details of WBD house, and you thought I was spying through the trees.
I didn't think you were. I was hoping you were. I was like desperately praying that Trish is like a long lens binoculars, like Guy Fieri has been spotted eating wings in the WBD house.
But so houses are an Olympic thing. So each team, for example, has a house. So, you know, the US has a Team USA house, there's a GB house, Columbia house, whatever. But also the media networks, there's a BBC one, there's an NBC one, and then there's a WBD one. Because although you guys have got Peacock and NBC USA showing your coverage, but in Europe, we have the secondary is Eurosport, which is Discovery, which is part of OBD. So they have a huge house there. So that's why you're seeing kind of all these celebrities and things coming into there. And that's why Tony's in the Europe meeting Zaslav at these Olympic Games. But Yeah, he is very fond of using gimmicks sometimes to kind of spark numbers because he's looking for quick wins because he doesn't feel like, I don't think he feels like he has time for kind of slow build in this regard. He just wants quick wins right now. So I can see the kind of want to it, but I think the downsides for me are much higher than the upsides. And it's another thing that would kind of take them away from part of their fan base that wants to look at them as differently an alternative. And I just think that's increasingly dangerous. Maybe other people don't agree with that, and they say, they brought Ric Flair in, it didn't really make much difference, it didn't tear people away, but it's just that trust thing that we always talk about, that element. You keep chipping away at it, it's never a great thing. So I would prefer him just to be maybe testing public opinion, maybe just something for a gimmick, and does he want to go back to WWE?
Well, that was the other suggestion.
Yeah,
that he's trying to use this to leverage WWE to make an offer, because we've seen recently that when AEW brings someone in or expresses interest in someone, WWE tends to jump on it.
Yeah, and there's going to be movement back and forth there in the next few months as well. Yes. So is it to counteract that? Are you going to lose people to WWE and you want to counteract this by having this kind of name thing? But I don't know. It's what's your kind of final opinion on this one?
This is one of those things that without further information, like obviously the picture being out there, that picture doesn't get out there unless they want it out there.
Yeah, of course.
That's that's just not a thing that they accidentally had this photo and it like, oh my God.
It looks like it's from a video.
It does. Honestly, to me, that was my first thought, was that it looks like a still from a video.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes you just got to Snapchat your mom and let her know you're hanging out with Shane McMahon. But I also think like it's one of those things where it's like, we had one, maybe it was Tunnel Talk that did it. You want to put somebody under like a truth serum where it's like just you and the person. Like, I'm not going to share this information, but I generally want to sit Tony Khan down sometimes and be like, who do you think your audience is? What audience are you trying to appeal to? Like, do you know people who think that Shane McMahon is successful in wrestling and like not a joke? Like, but I also know that they want the picture out, but you can have a meeting like that for a variety of reasons. You can have a meeting like that because you know somebody who's a friend who said, hey, can you have this meeting up? Like there's no negative in some ways to having those meetings. I think the negativity is the publicization of it more than the actual meeting itself on my part, because I'm like, why are you putting this out there? Like, you can have a meeting with who the fuck ever. Like, you should. Like, why would you close yourself off to shit? Unless it's like affecting, convicted sexual felon or whatever, but you know what I mean.
These pictures never get out. They have meetings all the time.
Oh no, they definitely, this is out there for a reason. I agree with that. I'm not trying to say that, but that's always the part that I'm like, let's get out there more than why are they meeting? But I just like, I don't know, it's just fucking dumb. Like, nobody wants Shane McMahon in AEW.
No.
Shane McMahon doesn't even want to be in AEW. Like, what are we doing here?
And it's not like we're angry about it or anything like that, because nothing's actually happened, but it's just that prospect of just like, just don't do it. Don't be stupid. That's it.
No, don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
Don't be an idiot. All right, so moving along onto like another little tiny topic that I think we both wanted to discuss a little bit. One of the things that came up this week is that the Ohio Department of Development noted that they had given AEW $1.2 million in tax credits for productions in Cleveland and other locations. This is part of their sort of standard motion picture tax credit program. WWE also earned, I believe it was $5 million for SummerSlam. Trish, tell me if I'm totally off base with that, but I think
1.6. 5 million is Las Vegas from WrestleMania.
Thank you. They got 1.6 in tax credits.
Yep.
So this would suggest that the 1.275 for AEW is not going to be just for Dynamite screenings or ROH tapings, but is going to be for something more significant, like possibly a pay-per-view in the next, before the end of the year, or even the spring.
The rest of the year is kind of booked up. They've got their pay-per-views up to World's End in Orlando kind of announced. So I think you look at something from next year. But yeah, I think they listed it as Cleveland and one other location. So it definitely feels like more than one particular show, especially for that amount of money. You look at SummerSlam's 1.6, you're looking at 1.2. That says a significant event at bare minimum. So
yeah. So that will be interesting to see what happens. People have talked about possibly another residency for Collision, but I don't know if that's something that would, again, add up to that 1.275. But speaking of residencies, I do think we could say at this point that the Arlington residency for Collision has been a success overall. They've managed to pull in decent audiences. They had like 1,300, I think, about for the 2 Collision tapings that they did on the Saturday Night's Live, and then also for the Friday night Death Before was it Death Before Dishonor or Super?
Death Before Dishonor.
Death Before Dishonor taping. And then this week they did a Thursday night taping where I think they pulled in like 850 or something. But again, it was a Thursday night taping for Collision show, which I think that would kind of make, account for that. So I think, the audience have seemed to like it. They were able to set up a lot of stuff with Lucha and using a lot of Lucha wrestlers, which I think has helped as well. In terms of like promoting, I think we've seen Hologram and the Beast Mortos has had more of an active role. What do you think now? Like, I mean, we're not quite done yet, but what do you think of the Collision residency overall?
From a live event perspective, it's been very successful. It would have recouped any money they did pay, and I don't think we can be completely sure they paid anything.
Yep.
So, in terms of cost cutting or cost saving, don't be alarmist about it. It's what it is.
Yeah, seriously.
They've done a good job with that. I'm not a massive fan of the look of the venue. The big black wall at the back is really off-putting, but that's something that if you're going to do these sort of things again, you need to look at. You can do more with it. I think someone pointed out some of the smaller mixed martial arts groups that do similar settings, but make them look just a little bit more, give it some more invention, something like that. I think that's...
I do like that they have the hard cam facing the entrances similar to how they do in Daly's Place, though. Like, I thought that was a good kind of visual callback, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that definitely looks better. And I think it does sound better in some ways to have the crowd actually sound loud. Even if they don't feel big compared to some of the Collision tapings that have sounded like tumbleweeds going through kind of the desert. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the look. The sound was a disaster.
The first week. Jesus.
That was Jesus Christ. So they're just little things that they just struggle sometimes to kind of get right first time. But overall, it's been a pretty successful experiment. It's going to be interesting because they've now scheduled a number of tapings back on the road. And how they manage that. We've not seen many top wrestlers working these tapings at all. In fact, we've seen talent, it's actually gone to less top of their top names than previously with Collision now that it's not a touring kind of event. So that's going to be interesting to see how they balance that when they go back out on the road. And they've got some work to do because the numbers after all in are
not good.
They're pretty weak. Yeah, let's be honest. They're pretty weak. They're some of the weakest on sales, first few weeks sales that they've done, full stop. So, they've got a challenge with that. I know it's not the priority when the TV deal is the be all and end all. Let's be honest, right now especially. But I think it does help, and it helps with growing popularity in your brand. And you need to try and maintain popularity in your brand because even when you sign a new TV deal, you have expectations, right? You've got to match those expectations.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of find ways to kind of make your live event experience something that gains loyalty in that aspect or brings people in. So that's a huge challenge going into the fall for them. But as an experiment, I'd like to see them, try different venues or try kind of, especially with Collision. Depends what Collision may end up becoming or when it ends up running. I think, Thursday tapings is something that I think they'd hope to move towards. It would make their lives a lot easier. Because you look at the last couple of weeks, they had, the week with the Ring of Honor taping. So you did Wednesday Night Dynamite, you did Friday Death Before Dishonor, you did Saturday Collision, you did Sunday Ring of Honor, and then you've got Wednesday, Thursday tapings this week with Dynamite and Collision, for your touring crew, and they do not have two crews. There are not two crews here. Don't. So you are putting a lot of workload onto your people, and that's a natural advantage that they had over WWE at the start that they do not have now. Nope. Especially with WWE reducing their house shows down to completely nothing outside of shows abroad. So, that's a huge difference. So if they can look at moving that kind of to back-to-back nights, I'm sure that would be hugely beneficial to them. But we'll see what happens with this aforementioned TV deal that's driving us crazy hearing about for the house.
I'm ready for this. It sounds ridiculous to say because I'm like, if I'm tired of hearing about it, I can only imagine how Tony Khan feels. But Jesus Christ, like, God, could we get this over with, please?
Just like enough already. But it would be cool to have them in different venues, or different kind of looking. I always think of like Red Rock now in Denver, in Colorado, that sort of thing. Like, be ambitious with it if you can. But I know a lot of these things are kind of 2025 things. to be ambitious with. But I think it's good that they did something different, because continuing the way they were doing wasn't working for them.
It wasn't cutting. I agree.
And it's great to see so many of the luchadors and see them get over. And your hope is that people listen to those crowds, and that then starts to be converted to arenas around the country. Someone like Beast Mortos or Hologram. I can't get used to calling him Hologram. He's Aramis. Like, what's going on here? He's a talented luchador. They've got quite a few, and I'd like to see them become more. I like seeing like Beast Mortos with Mark Briscoe. Make them regular parts of your talent roster, not just people we bring in because we want a party match or a luchador match. That was a WCW mistake. You just made that division like, oh, here's this, but it's not really part of the rest of our kind of, our ecosystem. So they don't need to be separate. Like, just integrate them into the rest of it and have them having, great matches, having stories, characters, but everything else. So that's where that kind of needs to move onwards to after this, I think. But I'll never complain about seeing more luchadors, and especially Mortos, because he is the best base in professional wrestling. He's incredible. And
he's really good.
TNA wasted him for the last few years for his
hell
US
is that?
contracts. So and aren't booking Laredo Kid currently, which pisses me off too, because I like Laredo. But so him getting more opportunities is I know it's difficult to move up, but we'll take what we can get with him at the moment. He's fantastic.
Beast Mortos using the Awful Waffle as his finisher now, although I wonder if he will rename it.
What's Awful Waffle in Beast Mortos?
He just seems to go grr arg, so yeah. All right, so let's move on to another topic we're going to talk about here today, which is maybe a little bit meatier and more stuff we have. It's face versus face matchups and what we think of them. And I have a suspicion that our audience will already know kind of what we think of them, given that this is not a topic we shied away from discussing before. Trish, kick us off with this.
This is because I suggested it, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I'm throwing it.
Okay. So
drive the boat.
Okay, yeah, no, so I'll admit where I got it from as well, where I was listening to. So I was actually listening to Tom Martin, who some people know I actually quite enjoy listening to him when he's been a pedantic little sod. But
we love pedantic little sods.
Yeah, no, he's pretty enjoyable and just but I think he's fascinating because sometimes the way he thinks about wrestling is completely different from most other people I listen to. And we talked a lot the other week around kind of face versus face and face versus heel, and do you need faces and heels anymore? And I know that when he was discussing it, he was discussing a question around Swerve Strickland facing mainly faces in the last few months. And I started to think about, have we moved past face versus heel? Or is this something that has been made kind of people weaker, or something that they've struggled with? And here's a lot of the issues that we have with AEW now, the fact that they've moved from face versus heel predominantly in their first few years. If you go back, if you look at the world title in the first few years, Jericho faced all faces. John Moxley faced two faces out of all his, which was Kingston, who was a kind of a tweener, and Darby Allin, but both of them were kind of lesser in him in status and experience, and that seems to kind of be the key. And then Omega faced all faces. So it was only when we got to the kind of page run that we started seeing kind of face versus face or face versus cool heel kind of kicking in. And it always seems to me that that's something that's really changed. And we've seen WWE move more to kind of very much face versus heel again and less kind of in direction. So I guess my question is for you, how much difference do you think this has made to them? But how much difference do you think this is anyway? Do you think that you can just have characters now that aren't good or bad guys and people can just cheer who they want?
So I think this is fascinating because I've seen this crop up a lot of places where people are like, face versus heel is outdated, you don't need it, blah, 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 blah. And I want to make it clear that, like, I don't believe in, like, universal rules about art or, anything like that. And I don't believe in universal rules about wrestling necessarily. I think that anything you do, like, any rule you put down can be broken. I just need it to be broken in an interesting and in a way that makes sense, in an interesting way that makes sense and works in the narrative, right? I'm fully on board for anything. You can make me believe anything. That said, I do think that there is sometimes this thing where fans create their own version of what's happening that isn't always supported in the text, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And I think sometimes that leads to people thinking that you don't need a face heel dynamic because whatever their mind is going, wherever their mind is going is fine. And it's like, sometimes I'm like, that's not really what the story they are telling. And I do think that face versus heel is a better dynamic for a wrestling match. I think it makes the match itself more interesting. I think it makes the match easier to sell. I think it makes the match more what you want to see. You said face versus face, and I was like, well, I want to go through like the last year of pay-per-views and sort of see, what is borne out in terms of like the top of the thing. And the fascinating part about this is I don't know that it fully supports or negates my point completely. Okay. Right? Because I think one of the things you and I love are like abnormal data points, right? And there's obviously one of the challenges with evaluating AEW's pay-per-views is that we have not had, and you and I talked about this in another episode, there has been no standard AEW pay-per-view cycle. They've kind of, especially in the last 2 years, have added different pay-per-views. They've, even since June of 22 when they threw Forbidden Door in there, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't know if you can talk about like what is their standard. They don't have a standard like the WWE does where it's like, okay, we did SummerSlam, we're going to move to WrestleMania. These are the midway things that happen along the side. But I think you can point to some of the more some of the higher viewed pay-per-views tend to have pretty clear dynamics within them. And the ones that don't have storylines and characters that people are invested in, which I don't think negates my point fully, right? Okay. So the biggest pay-per-view buy, and I'm talking about people watching, not physically showing up in the stadium, I'm talking about purchases of the pay-per-view itself. The biggest one, obviously, is All In, which was last August, and according to both Wrestling Observer Newsletter and Brandon Thurston, had 200,000 buys, right? That was headlined by MJF versus Cole. That's a face-face matchup, right? That immediate negate of my point. That said, people were super fucking invested in that match because of the characters and because of the relationship they had with each other, right? Because of the story that got told. So I think that kind of goes to my point of like, you can break this, but you've got to be doing it in an interesting way, in a way that people haven't seen before. People were very invested in that friendship, unfortunately, with it ending the way that it did. The lowest, let me put it this way. The three lowest... Okay, let me put it this way. I want to raise this next point. The pay-per-view that had the most surprising number of buys for the last year was Wrestle Dream. Excuse me, not Wrestle Dream, was World's End, which was on December 30th of 2023 and had 145,000 buys, which is the largest number of buys of any of the new pay-per-views that they threw in 23 and 24. Okay? Very clear face-heel dynamic for the end of that show. You had Danielson, you had MJF versus Samoa Joe. That was your, like, what's going to happen here? World titles on the line. Your world champion, your babyface world champion is facing a heel challenger. What's going to, and I think you could argue, okay, so this was something going along the lines of, we know MJF's probably losing the belt here. How's it going to happen? All that other stuff. But again, you have a situation where there's a story being told, and you have a clear heel-face dynamic. That's kind of one of the things that jumped out at me in looking at this. I think you can look at some of the other bigger ones that stand out. Revolution, obviously, juiced significantly by Sting's retirement, right? But you still had a very clear heel-face dynamic with a strong lead-up into the pay-per-view. Right? And you had Swerve versus Paige versus Joe as the secondary follow-up match, which was another one with strong face-heel dynamic, right? Down at the bottom, you had Wrestle Dream and All Out. I think two pay-per-views that sort of suffered from having, being kind of one after the other. Obviously, All Out happened a week after All In, and Wrestle Dream was just a month after that. But All Out, you had Jon Moxley versus Orange Cassidy. Both of them, I don't feel that. What is your thought on this? Do you feel like Mox was a heel in that program or a face?
No, he was a baby face because he was challenging him as an obstacle baby face. So there's a difference. Right. So, or he was challenging him to be better than him. He wasn't saying you're this, you're that. So he wasn't playing a heel. He's playing an obstacle, like you need to beat me to, obtain this. So, but he's not playing it. He wasn't a heel. Moxley's been a tweener, you could say, for quite some time, and I think that's a whole other debate in itself about, not having. I think that's probably the harder thing, is not having actual clear barriers can sometimes be less constructive. I think that can cause more issues. And I think the issue with that is, so the thing about the Max Cole stuff, so whether you talk about All In or you talk about World's End, or even you can look at Omega turning on John Moxley, or Winter is Coming did a huge rating, even bigger rating the week after, is what you are feeding off. And the same with Bucks, Omega, and Page at Revolution at 2020. You are feeding off the potential of a turn.
Yes.
So you have this friendship angle, and you think, if you look at WrestleMania last year, the month before WrestleMania build up to WrestleMania wasn't the biggest thing. The biggest thing was the Royal Rumble, where you knew they were going to turn on Sami Zayn. Yes. And you built that angle up through the friendship thing. You've got this thing, but that turn's coming. So the prospects of a turn, whether it's an attack on somebody to turn them babyface, to then kind of trying to drive back at the heel, whether it's someone's going to turn heel on someone else, and the mystery over when that's going to happen, is what powered all of those programs. The Page Omega Bucks one was all pretty much powered on that relationship between Kenny and Hangman. And, even at the end, he's still on the ropes. So you are playing off a different thing. I think that is much more interesting because you're also using the relationships between these characters. So that kind of dynamic will hold much more than I'm a good guy, you're a good guy, let's see who's the best. I think that's where the difference is. So you are taking a different dynamic where, neither character is perfect and you've given them depth and you've got this build up of this relationship. And it's the same way, to an extent with what they're doing with the Judgment Day stuff, which is a lot cruder and kind of not as... not as there's no depth there, let's be honest. No. But it's the same thing. So you're using that to then impose of a turn. And it was the same with the Omega thing. So you did that and then you have that final turn. And that final turn helps that babyface then, because then they have something immediately to aim for. So you have, so straight away Moxley could aim back at Omega, and then we did the exploding barbed wire, and then you move him sideways. So if you're going to do that, that important thing is it gives them something to chase. It's what they've done wrong with the MJF thing in a way. Was, he had the thing where Joe and, Undisputed Kingdom, I was calling UK, I got to stop doing that. But I can't keep on United Kingdom. But they turn on him, and then there's just when he comes back, the idea should be that he chases them. It's a natural made story. So you set that up to then kind of give that babyface energy, because it's so difficult to create babyface momentum and to keep that momentum. It's the same thing we're going to see with Roman Reigns now. Can they keep that momentum with him as a babyface? It's a lot harder. And that's where the money is. So you would say the money's in the babyface chase, and it is. It still is. So this idea that, and it's always bigger when they're chasing a heel. And this is where I think you can see in their numbers. So, especially with TV. So I think there's a difference with what you achieve with TV and what you can achieve with pay-per-view. So I thought about some of the bigger examples in kind of history as well. So on the biggest face versus face matchup was WrestleMania 28, John Cena and The Rock. Did 1.2 million buys, just short of their pay-per-view buy record for WrestleMania, which was held by WrestleMania 23, which might have been headlined by a kind of face versus face matchup, actually. I think they turned Michaels towards the end, but it was Shawn Michaels and John Cena, but it was underneath was the Vince McMahon Donald Trump thing, which is what actually drew the buy rate. Jesus Christ. But the whole idea of WrestleMania 28, you had The Rock and Cena, and it didn't sell out the building. I was in the building, actually. And it probably wasn't even the hottest thing that night. The hottest thing that night was actually the Hell in a Cell, the Triple H Undertaker, which had more distinct face versus heel things. But it probably was the reason behind that pay-per-view number. They actually did less on pay-per-view the year after. So that is the biggest face versus face matchup. And you look at it and go, okay, that's it. But TV-wise, they didn't do great numbers going in. They struggled going in. And we've kind of seen that with face versus face, this year with AEW, the Danielson Ospreay stuff didn't drive kind of big numbers. Same with these things. And they didn't do great on pay-per-view either. No. So same with the Swerve and Ospreay. It's harder because they're two kind of names kind of a building, not two kind of. And it was the same with Moxley and Naito. The dynamics there ended up being face versus face and an absolute fucking disaster. So that's where, if you're not careful, if you don't get the build right, it can kind of really go to one side. But it can also cause damage. So that Cena Rock thing, did that damage Cena somewhat. Did it damage The Rock? It probably damaged The Rock more. So you choose this dynamic because you want the two big stars, but it doesn't draw so well on TV. It doesn't seem to entertain in that way. It might do for that pay-per-view because it's like you have these two big stars. Great, okay, the names on the top probably won't matter. That's like a boxing thing, isn't it? Right? But
yeah.
I don't think it draws as much. You look at AEW, their most successful programs outside of the ones we've talked about where you're playing off the turn, like the Cole and MJF one.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
that's a different thing. Or Omega and Moxley. Are things like Omega and Page, are things like MJF and Punk, are things like Cody Rhodes and MJF. Orange Cassidy and Chris Jericho did well for TV. So their traditional kind of things have helped them more. And I do think that what it says to me is once the audience has decided they're just cheering who they want, then that's not about, not needing heels and faces. That's not, the booking isn't leading them where it should be.
No.
So the idea is that you lead your audience to cheer for the baby faces or to boo the heels. And sometimes you might have these matchups where you play on the dynamics because you are doing a change or you are preparing somebody for a change or you have to adapt to it. But if they are just cheering who they want, and then something's gone wrong, something is not, or something needs to change. There's a different element. You're not leading, and that's always been the thing. You lead your audience, and they should basically grow to want what you are delivering to them. That's the whole idea, and I think that's where it kind of gets lost. And I do think that is what's happened. And I think you've got this concept of the cool heel in recent years. People just wanting to get over. So they're unwilling to kind of give up the things that make you a great heel. So, there's so many easy tricks you can use. Managers. So Kenny Omega went straight to Don Callis when they did his heel turn. And it works. You restrict his voice. For the first few months, you get used to it. And then the fans eventually buy into it. And then they'll just boo the heel because they want to boo the heel. And it's like, and Don Callis will encourage that, heat magnet, right? Same with, Paul Heyman did the same thing with Roman Reigns. You control the crowd, you allow something like that. Someone like Chris Jericho is so good at being able to just kind of do it anyway that you don't need, like a manager with him. I always think about the thing of Action Andretti when he just, he'll just go, he'll call the name or something like that to get the crowd to chant. He's very clever at just manipulating people in that way.
So smart in that match.
That's like an ultimate one because you're playing on that underdog thing. But where you struggle is if you put two people on the same level who are baby faces and there's no kind of clear difference between them or there's nothing kind of moving like there, then you can tend to maybe hurt them. And I think that's something like detrimental. I'm not a big fan of that. And I think the over-reliance on face versus face, so we just put names against each other, just can sometimes undermine the story and that kind of heat. And I do think it's heat that gets people in buildings. I do think it's what sells tickets still. I think we still see that. And I think you can do it differently. So New Japan, for example, that's always the thing that always gets thrown at me, is, they do other things. So theirs is, if you want to talk about sports-based pro wrestling, it always gets quoted about the AEW thing. But the way they do it is you have so many competitions a year where you have, face versus face matchups. Potentially you've got New Japan Cup, you've got G1, you've got tag leagues, whatever. But the whole key thing in the way they do things is that you create obstacles for baby faces in different ways. So you don't necessarily have to have a heel in those situations. But say in a G1, we've got very used to in recent years, Naito's always chasing from like 1 and 4 or whatever. So you create different obstacles. So you can find ways to get fans behind your baby faces without it being kind of having to tear somebody else. Or it's about, and that's all about follow-up and stories as well. But I do think there is that element, and when we take that away, is there a much emotional investment in these characters? I think that's really important.
I think that's something that, Tunnel Talk said it really well today, and the last 2 weeks they've been on fire in terms of like the way that they've talked about AEW's booking, and I have to give them a lot of credit in that, it's not just like critique for critique's sake, but they've had some really thoughtful conversations about what AEW could have done to have made the build for like Blood and Guts, for example, better. What they could be doing to make the build for Danielson versus Swerve better. And one of the things that got talked about was like, the match gets announced and like, people are like, that's going to be a great match. Like, well, yeah, it's definitely going to be a great match. But what are you going to do between now and when the pay-per-view is to make me want to watch the TV? right? Like
Yeah.
if there's not right, like if it's like, well, there's nothing really going on between these two characters, there's not a lot happening. Like, why should I be tuning in on a week to week basis? And that I thought kind of rang true with me because I think that's been the case for some of these matchups. Like, I think, in the case of Swerve and Ospreay for Forbidden Door, I think Swerve has done, I thought Swerve did a great job of trying to put something together where there wasn't anything natural. I think they were less successful with Swerve and Joe, even though Joe was kind of a heel still. And I think they were less successful for Ospreay versus Danielson going into Dynasty. But it's just... the criticism used to be like AEW just does dream matches and right, like it just does dream matches. There's no story. And everybody who watched it knew that was like a fucking bullshit thing, but it feels more true now than it ever has. And they're just throwing stuff out there and it's like, the matches are great. Like, of course the matches are great. Like the matches are always great. Like I have no issue with the matches being great, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying I'd like a little bit more than that to get me to tune in on a regular basis.
Yeah, and we look at the Swerve Danielson thing, and we've talked about the Swerve Danielson Hangman dynamics to death. And the only thing I want to say is that stuff's going to stand up really well in about 3 months, bet you. Jesus Christ. And lower your expectations. If you think it's all going to sort itself out by November and there's going to be like a big Swerve Hangman world title blow off, just lower your expectations. Yeah. But here's a question. So we have a face versus face matchup here where Swerve is using heel lines, but Danielson's still kind of aggressive, right? And we had a similar thing, not quite the same dynamic with Paige and CM Punk. And one of the ideas back then was exactly what we've kind of talked about with the turn. So, we talk about the Omega turn, John Moxley. So you have a match here where the babyface world champion, if you want to support him, you are supporting him ending the career of this guy that somebody is the greatest of all time, right? So, and you have this other babyface that is putting his career on the line without the other babyface offering, by the way. So that's kind of a strange. So is this a setup? Is this potentially a setup? Could you see it for Danielson to potentially turn? I know this is really funny because we spent a month being told that heel can't win at Wembley, but to turn on that event and then that protects Swerve more than just being beaten straight.
I don't know. I think that I would struggle with that one, and part of it's going to depend on Danielson's execution. And I think one of the challenges I struggle with is like, Bryan Danielson is very present in the moment, but he doesn't really commit to things in terms of like there is that authenticity there of like, this is Bryan Danielson, but again, a little bit to steal from Tunnel Talk. Like I would like sometimes for Danielson to remember that he should be playing a character too. Like, we could fake it a little bit. Like, I don't think that Jon Moxley really wanted to beat the shit out of Orange Cassidy, but he made me believe that he did. Like, I just feel like there's such... If Danielson is not retiring at Wembley, nope. He's made that very clear.
They've telegraphed it now, which we expected him to.
Right. It's still like, oh, okay, now there's not even a question of whether or not Swerve's going to defeat Danielson because Danielson... Right. And people who are like, oh, Danielson could be maybe more injured. And I'm like, well, then he wouldn't be wrestling Jeff Jarrett this week. Because we'd be, right. Like,
come on now.
We've seen this. Like, I don't get it. So like,
they've kind of telegraphed it. So how do you protect? How do you protect Swerve as a babyface in this situation?
I don't think they can. I think regardless of what happens, you're going to end up with a chunk of people cheering for Swerve to lose.
Yep.
And I don't see how that makes things good for you long term, especially because like, and Dave said this sort of succinctly, like, what do you get out of this? Like Bryan Danielson's gone. He's retired. He's not going to be there full time. Even if it's like another couple months where he's the world champion, whatever, Swerve is still there. How does this make Swerve draw money for you in the long term? Or like, forget the draw money part, because I think sometimes we lean into that. Like, how does that make Swerve like a more interesting character? Like, and I think Swerve is extremely talented. He's he could probably, if there's people who could figure it out, he could probably figure it out. Because he obviously, like you talked about, we've said this, like in terms of like making the losses count, like the losses mean something. If anybody's going to do that, Swerve's going to do that. But it's also one of those things where it's just like, I just don't, it seems like the priorities are out of whack in terms of like what we are building for the future.
Yeah.
and I'm trying very hard. Like, this is like one of those things where, like, and I think you and I took a lot of criticism last week for being very worked up about stuff.
I don't care. Maybe we should just shout about MJF instead. I don't know.
I don't care either, but I also want to be. I never want to go into a situation and be like I'm going to listen to Bryan Danielson and I'm going to be convinced going into it that Bryan Danielson can't sell me on this match because I've already decided that he can't, right? I want to go into it and be like, okay.
That was our thing, though. Our thing was to explain why people were frustrated, and I think most of them are valid, and they're going to leave them more valid in 6 months. So it's like, well, yeah, unless they decide to do something different. Some things change every week, so who the fuck knows? But
I don't know. I don't think that Bryan Danielson turning heel at Wembley, I think it would be a shock value, oh my God moment. I don't know that it would be a good, like, storytelling moment.
Yeah, so the thing I always think about this is, and it was the same with the Punk Page dynamic, and I was thinking about this with some New Japan examples. I was thinking about Shingo losing the belt to Okada at Wrestle Kingdom, and Sanada last year who's kind of a tweener with Tetsuya Naito. But when they've done that as well, so when you've got this difference in experience, and the babyface world champion is the lesser experienced or the lesser name, that tends to be when you've got face to face where you're running into more issues.
Yes,
so when you've got, so when we see, it's what we saw with like Swerve and Ospreay was we saw people on a similar level, and they worked that match perfectly. We spoke about it at the time how they worked it, so there was never this kind of. Although Swerve, I think, did work to get more heat, but it just kind of didn't happen. It just kind of the crowd were just more behind him anyway. But they didn't allow anybody to get too much in one way or another, which is the untraditional way, because normally you have somebody working heel. But when we had these matches where you have someone who's more experienced as babyface, they tend to run over the person less, and that's where you get the most kind of consistent damage. Whereas if you have, so like when Jon Moxley was champion and you have him wrestling Darby Allin, or Eddie Kingston, they then come up to that level and you get away with those matchups because they grow from those matchups, they gain from them. Whereas I think when you've got the other way round and that babyface is triumphing over someone who's less experienced, they don't gain anything. And then they don't have anything to go with in a next story and revenge. I think that's the difference. So when you've got a situation like this, what we've got now is always going to be, to me, kind of the lesser of options. So you don't have the heat in the kind of traditional way, but two, you are encouraging to cheer for the person they know. Especially when you've got a huge casual crowd like something like Wembley, where you're going to have people coming in who just hear advertisements or that sort of thing. So that's where the difficulty is. And I think there's been too much of that. And even something like, and when you don't protect the babyface, or you don't have, the other thing I think what it is that babyfaces have to have the ability to talk. They have to have that thing where they can communicate with their audience so much. And we've got so many situations as of late where the heel is the one doing all the talking. And then the babyface is kind of mute. And this is the thing where New Japan get right. So you can have all these kind of things and these face-to-face matches in kind of tournaments and that sort of thing because you've got promo every day. Every single fucking day after the G1, I can run down the promos. We can see what they say. We can go through it. We can find kind of things going into the matchup. We can find things that are interesting. We can see their pathway because you are focused on that individual's pathway and what they need to get to their goal rather than that potential matchup. It's a different dynamic that plays into how they do things. But New Japan still keep everything face versus heel majority of the time. They still, Evil is still gunning first, however many wins into the tournament first before his first defeat to give you that obstacle of that heel as you go forward. So they still play with those dynamics. The biggest matches you can think of in New Japan in recent years, in terms, especially of people coming in, Kenny Omega go back as a heel against Will Ospreay to make Will Ospreay. Hugely heated match, way more heated than the match that followed with Jay and Okada. Same thing with, Jericho going in for Omega. It did 100,000 extra subscribers to New Japan World. The match in terms of perhaps the creation of AEW. So you use those elements. So it's still in these big things. They still use these elements, and it's different because you can have an obstacle world champion. But what they tend to do is have the experienced one. So for Okada, Okada with the first few rounds is as a heel, because it's more comfortable to do that when you're coming in. But then when he wants to challenge Tanahashi can play the experienced babyface who can lean on the heel side. It's much, much easier with that dynamic than the other way around. And I think that's the AEW issue, isn't it? They flipped it. So we're having the babyface that's the newer babyface that still, the crowd's still kind of connecting with, playing the more of the heel character, and then you've got the more experienced babyface that the crowd has had tons of time to connect with and experiences with, and things that you connect and you remember and you play into memories, because that's all that's important. And that's a difference. And then you need to hear from them.
I think the only way it works for Swerve to lose to a heel turning Danielson is if Swerve beats Danielson like as his last match as a full-time wrestler, wherever that is. You know, if he's not going to do that, then it doesn't help him. There's no benefit. There's no reason to do it. You know, and I just think that's your mistake right there, right? You know, at some point you're going to have to figure out how to do this, because you've made a commitment that you're going to have Danielson all the time, right? He's not going to be in storylines necessarily, but he's going to do his dream matches. He's going to be on your pay-per-views. He's going to do, you know, whereas his health allows, right? So, you know, Swerve can't beat him as one of those dream matches on a pay-per-view, like in a year or two, whatever. Swerve has to beat him on his final run on his way out the door. That's how I feel about it.
Okay.
That to me is the way you manage to keep Swerve strong. You know, you manage not to lose you manage not to lose all the good work you did in the first part of 2024 in terms of building Swerve and protecting him and putting him in those segments and all the shit that you did to make him look good.
Yeah, it's just there's a huge benefit for having strong heels as well. And
I agree.
I think there's a tendency to want to play the cool heel and get yourself over and that sort of thing. And I get that, because it's such a degree of business where maybe it's not as what it was in 20 years ago, where, you know, they wouldn't have any T-shirts, so they wouldn't have this or no music or whatever. But the best heels, the top heels, the ones that can kind of make the business difference. So what we saw with Kenny Omega, what we saw with Chris Jericho, what we saw with Roman Reigns, is they know how to eradicate things that are going to get them cheered. So whether it be adding a manager, whether it be kind of changing how you speak, whether it be changing your action, whether it's, you know, we hate that they use interference. You know, Kenny's reign was pretty dominant for the first few months on interference, but it did actually do the job of kind of creating that kind of that heat for him that then carried him into the hot babyface, you know, opposition in the summer. So they know how to do it. And you can see it with Paige now. So Paige is saying, as much as everyone's like, he's a baby face, he come out of baby face, he's justified heel. It's the same as Drew McIntyre. It's the same role they're playing in effect. But what they've done is like, so what's he done, right? You change the music, you change the style, you change your match layout, you change your expression, right. You change how you talk, everything. You have to change everything. You have to take things away from that fan base. The same with the Okada run, as stupid as the balloon Okada, red hair, tights, you know, like, I'm not even going to wear my, Jesus Christ, 2018 G1. Oh my God, I watch that quite often, but oh my God. But you take these things away, Jesus, you take these things away. So then when you bring them back, you have that babyface run set. And having that mega heel run can so often lead into that huge babyface run. And that's why it's kind of important to keep them there in that way as well. But you can't there's the other thing, is that you can't beat your heels too often. So we've had heel turns this year. You know, Trent broke up the best friends and then was kind of beaten 3 times. And yes, it was
what the fuck? That made absolutely no sense to me, and was magnified by the fact that he ended up being injured and going out. Like that, nobody was getting more heat in the spring than Trent. Like nobody was getting more heat in that, and they beat him through. Like what? He should have absolutely beaten Orange Cassidy at freaking Double or Nothing. Yeah, like it made no sense. Yeah,
Chris Statlander has only just got a victory over Willow. You know, right. So this is that's kind of the danger thing that you play, is that then if you don't allow your heels to get enough heat, and they have a difficulty of trying to protect everybody, or, you know, trying to give some people losses, and they've been so protective in so many recent years that now we have this, you know, you have situations where you have some people take losses, some people don't, some people are protecting losses, some people don't, and you can see a differentiation. So instead of just being like, they're a heel, it's fine, they'll get their heat back, people just get angry about the losses. So that's where that trust element, that trust in the booking has gone. So you have to do that with your heels. You have to have strong heels, because you need them obstacles for people to overcome.
Well, this is, I just want to touch on that before you move on to the next point. This is part of the issue with the BCC is heels that you talked about. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to talk about Danielson's heel run or even Moxley's heel run. The only person who changed his music was Claudio. Yeah. Right? Like, everything else about Moxley and Danielson as heels in the BCC has stayed the same. Mm-hmm. And if you want to argue that, like, you know, the BCC is a tweener group and all that other stuff is fine, but I think it's just added to the confusion about the group and the confusion about who people are supposed to cheer for, you know? And I think it's part of the issue in terms of, like, you know, that sort of percentage of, like, are you fully in on this sometimes that I feel with Danielson, where it's like, I get that you're doing a great job in the ring, but, like, in terms of the program itself, like, you know, where's your head at? Anyway, I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to make that before you moved on.
That Moxley-Naito match was a complete mess for that dynamic.
Yes.
You know, they had different build. into what they actually did. Moxley was playing up being a New Japan wrestler. Just the whole thing was just, it should have been, Naito playing like the bad guy sort of thing, similar to what Shingo did, and it ended up not being that because Moxley with that style. So it's, if you mess it, and then what do you get? You get silence. And yes, it was near the end of a very long card, but that's what you get. So you have to get those dynamics right, and even if it's just like an individual match, and you can switch them up if you get the locality thing, like the Ospreay Jericho thing. Jericho is very good at this, right? If you want an optimum guy who's very, very good at this, whether you like it or not, is Chris Jericho. He is incredibly good at this because he can sense it, and it's about knowing when to turn people as well. So there's one I'm looking at the moment. So G1, not really talk much about the G1. Very much enjoying the G1. This 2-block format with 3 people going through to the kind of knockouts is reinvigorating it because it's so much less predictable. You can't see the patterns, can't see the formulas, which is great. But you've got someone like Gabe Kidd, and you can feel that Gabe Kidd, the audience are starting to get behind him.
Oh yeah,
you can feel it, and now he's toning down some of like the kind of the screaming character and into a kind of a more dangerous character actually. You can still feel it. You can feel it against Naito yesterday. So it's like you start to fix. They're going to turn, and they start to play through into the story. So you've got Finlay making kind of comments about him, and you can see where the turn's going to come. But they know they've noticed it, and they're going, okay, we'll play on it. So we'll play on him shaking hands with Shingo, and then he can kick him anyway. And the balls, whatever, so you can regain the heat. But then you're teasing the audience, you're testing it. So you can do that, but what you can't do is make that your regular act. You've got to make that going somewhere. And that's something they tend to get right in these sort of things. So I do think that's kind of important as well. But you need heels as well because it covers up limitations easier. You can, it's much easier. With a babyface, you can't really, it's much harder to give them a manager unless you're Arn Anderson. How did that? And when you said that would happen, funny. It's funny that happened, isn't it? But it's easier to you can't just give them a manager or just kind of cut things off, or if they're limited physically or sort of thing, or they're not the quickest stuff. It's much more difficult to do that with a babyface. It's much more noticeable. Look at like Wardlow, right?
Right.
He turns babyface. All right. He changed his offense, which didn't help matters. But it's so much easier to spot his limitations as soon as he's got to play babyface and he's got to capture that crowd attention. Whereas you can play power heel much more easier and just do the odd thing and then play for that babyface turn. So his limitations became much more apparent as soon as he turned babyface, which should show you how hard it is to be a babyface. So,
well, I think that's where it's frustrating, especially like last night. You have obviously House of Black is turning face. You have Bang Bang Gang turning face. I'm like, guys. Like, we can't afford to lose some of these dudes on the heel side. Like, it's slim pickings right now. Like, somebody has to be like the bad guy. I don't know. It's a struggle right now in that dynamic. It's like literally Roddy Strong, and that's it.
Yeah, and not having top heels is difficult. It makes life difficult, and you can even look at, WWE have had Drew. But on the Cody side, on the SmackDown side, they struggled. So you've had kind of very heatless match. Like that Solo Sikoa match was heatless.
Right. Well, that's the big question coming out of SummerSlams. Who is Cody going to face next? Right?
Yeah, they're probably going to turn Orton after do the Reigns thing. Right. They're probably going to turn Orton, which makes more sense because Orton's a natural heel anyway. Not the most ambitious heel, but he's a natural heel. So, that's where you get into that thing. So then you have to do that to have that strong kind of... And then they've got The Rock, obviously, which they did the run with. Because they played off controversy. So it's taking advantage of something like that. You have something that's hot, it has momentum. Okay, if we switch them here, great, we have that dynamic. And that's the dynamic that you want. And that really powered Cody. If you look at Cody at the Rumble, the reaction to the Rumble win wasn't huge. It was that controversy and the Rock stuff and then playing off that heel character that then kind of powered him into WrestleMania, into this stretch. So having that heel... that dynamic was really important for that babyface not to just burn out. And it's so difficult now because people are always looking for the next thing, who's the next champion. We hear this all the time, right? Give this person a run, give that person a belt. There's no, the patience isn't quite there, and you have to lead people into having that patience. But they're not going to do that unless there's something for them to chase. So here's a question as well. So MJF, right? We talk about MJF a lot. Okay. So you've got this dynamic with MJF and Will Ospreay. And MJF's trying to play the American heel. During the Olympics, and an election year.
Yeah, it's so fucked up. I think one of the struggles that I'm having with this right now is I understand where they're going. And I want to make it clear. One of the things that I'm really frustrated about when it comes to like people hearing criticism of this angle, which I think is not terrible, but not great and is fine. Let me put it that way, is people are like, you know, if you dislike MJF, you don't understand that you're being worked. And I'm like, I understand what a heel is. I know that I'm supposed to dislike them. I'm not supposed to think they're doing a bad job as a heel. Like, I'm supposed to be like, oh, like, I'm fully aware of what's happening in wrestling, and I'm perfectly content to allow my emotions to go along. Like, I don't know. Like, you know, it's the same as people who are like, oh, MJF is really racist. Like, that's a character, you idiots. Anyway, side note, the problem is that they've made this so much more complicated for themselves and so much more complicated for Will Ospreay, who is not the world's greatest promo in the world. He's pretty good, but he still struggles at times because, yes, you are going to beat MJF in Wembley and British people everywhere are going to sink into a tremendous amount of patriotism and happiness that they have managed to secure a victory. That's according to like the television. That's what appears to be.
We like the Olympics, but we're not the most patriotic bunch.
Well, that's the part that like I'm like, has anyone ever met a British person? They don't seem to be the most patriotic people in the world. Like I'm not overwhelmed by a tremendous spirit of patriotism when I've visited the Great Britain, but. That said, the entire build for this match is in the United States. And you've literally got
in the Southeast.
In the south of the United States, who's like, you know, so every promo that Ospreay does, he has to spend a third of it talking about, I actually love America, even though I hate you. And it just adds a level of complication to this that is so fucking unnecessary. And yes, I get that, like, proud American like fucking heels is a thing, and you know MJF is gonna fight Michael Oku, and MJF is gonna fight like he fought freaking Templario, yep. And like I get it, but at the same time it's like I don't think that it's the best choice in terms of like how much it complicates what they're doing now, because you're consistently having crowds cheering USA in the middle of your heels big speech. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I look at this and I think about all of the potential options for a feud between MJF and Will Ospreay. And I am like, why is this the fucking thing they picked? This makes no sense to me. There's so many other ways they could have gone with this that would have been more interesting, that would have been easier for Ospreay and whoever's facing MJF, that would have been something the audience could have gotten behind. And instead we're doing, you know, MJF. And I think this is another thing that like, if you're fine with, like, there are people that are, like, on board with this, and they want to see, like, a shithead American get the crap beat out of them, and, like, you know, I get that. There are also people who are, like, let's be realistic right now, having a tremendous amount of existential dread about their future, right? We see what's happening we talked about Logan Paul and the issue with transphobia in this country. We've talked about the way that like the far right in the US have talked about what they want to do, you know, in terms of women's reproductive health and voting rights and non-white people and you know, LGBT plus people, right? Like people have an existential dread about their future. So watching a television show that's supposed to be an escape where you have a bad guy who's like playing into that, like, not everybody is like, whoa, that's going to be awesome. Like, some folks are like, oh, God, I don't want a little fascism in my escaped, like, stupid wrestling stuff. Like, I think that's a thing that sometimes people just fail to see. Like, why? Like, sometimes, no offense to white guys, sometimes white guys miss why that's not something that non-white people are going to be fully into.
It's such a rehash of the John Moxley thing at All Out 2020 as well, which was fucking brutal. But to me, it's like the one question I thought was quite interesting is, does it always relate to his character? You know, this is a guy that has been talking about things in his childhood and things presented against him. And I think one of the most interesting things is he a caricature now? So is that a heel? Is it that we still need faces and heels, but we need ones that are more 3D? Rather than the kind of 2D kind of character where I just get cheap heat and that sort of thing, and there isn't anything else much to me, because we know there is more to Max.
Well, that's the problem, right?
That's what his kind of act is currently. So you have this 2D thing in a world where we are seeing more 3D characters, whether that be in movies and TV and other industries, creative industries. is that what we have to move when we need to have more 3D faces and heels rather than just having all faces or all characters?
Like, it's fine if you want to, like, I am certainly not someone who's going to say that cartoons have no place in wrestling, right? Like, I'm a full-time believer in ridiculousness and silliness and whatever. But, like, again, this is your top heel. This is your top program right now. Like, I have a hard time seeing Swerve versus Danielson as being bigger deal than this.
It's the most promoted program.
It's the most promoted program.
Biggest spots,
it leads off every fucking week. Like, right? So, like, this is all we've got. And again, like, if this was, like, MJF is capable of more than this. He's shown us that he can do deeper character work than this. Like, the Four Pillars feud was deeper than this, right? Like, people didn't like it, but, like, it was deeper than this. It really talked about, like, there was some insecurity stuff in there that I thought was fascinating. There was a comparison between how people's careers had played out that I thought was interesting. Like, there was more to it than this. This is just, like, I don't know, like, it's fine. Like, if this is what he wants to do, that's fine. But I think he's going to really struggle. And I think AEW is going to struggle if they're going to put all their eggs in the Max basket. And this is, like, their number one guy and this is their lead guy. Like, okay.
Yeah. No, there's some clever bits to it, because you think the international belt, the idea was to replicate what Ospreay did with the now global championship.
Yeah.
It's a stupid name in New Japan. But I think the timing's kind of been a little bit off, and especially where they're running from the US. They're in Norfolk, Virginia next week, not this week. They're in Winston-Salem.
This isn't gonna fucking cheer the
come on.
Like, woo, London! Like, come on.
Yeah, and it's just funny because, like, we'll cheer it, but it's just like I think you'll get some cheers at Wembley. I think you will, because I can see it. I can see it coming.
Again,
but hey,
tremendously patriotic British people.
Yeah, we're very, very patriotic. We get a flag out for the Olympics. We don't even put it outside.
Even your assholes aren't that patriotic.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, what a week. Okay. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to kind of... It's an interesting discussion, and I do think that I still live in a line that there needs to be faces and heels, and they have to find ways of getting you wanting to boo heels, and you can use some of the old techniques. I think there's much cleverer ways to do things now, and things have to progress. And, I don't think that we need to live in a world where we try and use all the tricks from the 70s and 80s anymore or anything like that. But it's still an important point, and I still think that we aren't past it. We aren't past it. We don't live in this world where you can just have these other characters, and I don't think we do in any of the kind of creative models or different areas that we all watch or read or listen to or anything like that. So there's still good and evil in the basis in a lot of stories, right?
Yes.
And a lot of the world.
Yes.
So. All right.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions we're going to wrap up with.
Cool.
3, I should say. The first one being about London's Wrestlemania, which, if folks are not aware, last week, I think it was, time has lost all meaning to me recently. Last week, the last 2 weeks, London Mayor Sadiq Khan had a meeting with Nick Khan, and no relation, and Triple H.
With a tiny belt.
With the tiniest, please, I'll just gotta try and try and retweet the picture and remember that when the episode comes out on Tuesday. But like it was, so first of all, Triple H and Nick Khan are both about the same size, and Sadiq Khan is a much smaller framed and shorter man.
Yes.
Okay. So he looked quite petite standing between the two of them, and then he was holding up a WWE replica belt that was like the size of a bracelet. Right? It was almost the size of those shoe things that the Bucks were doing with the AEW title belt, right? Like, it was that big. So, and they were like leaning in on him. Like, the picture looked like they were trying to take his lunch money from him. It was it was not good. But basically the issue is that Sadiq Khan had talked in a previous interview about wanting to bring Wrestlemania to London. And obviously Triple H and Nick Khan jumped all over this, and they were happy to meet with him. So there's no agreement. There's no arrangement, as far as we know, of nothing that's been publicized. It was just that they had met and had productive conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I got, so this is, I know, right? Losing my mind. So this is a question from Sean O'Brien. He sent it to us by email. Thank you, Sean. On WrestleMania potentially being in London, do you think this This puts future all-ins at risk at Wembley, given WWE's history of trying to get some kind of non-compete deals in place with venues and cities. Also, how could WWE typically bring in enough tourism to offset the cost of bringing them to the City of London? London isn't bidding for all-in. Is the WWE machine that much bigger than AEW's in terms of travel, that they think London would turn more of a profit for WrestleMania than it would for all-in, even with them paying WWE for the event? So thank you, Sean, for the question. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that London's not going to pay for a WrestleMania.
Oh, I don't know.
Ooh. Talk to me about this.
All right. So, first of all, on the all-in thing. So, in terms of blocking venues is just not a thing in the UK. So, you can't block Wembley Stadium for the rest of the year and say, we're not having another event here, no more wrestling. It's the same way, we've had TNA tours running the same venues as WWE tours for most of the decade before last. So it's it's just not a thing. That's not what's going to keep them out. So a WrestleMania being advertised and that sort of thing would damage a potential all-in. It would damage the kind of appeal, because WrestleMania is such a big brand. It's huge, and this is the difference. So we talked about earlier about the difference between SummerSlam and WrestleMania. I know Forbes. There's a thing in the the deck that Brandon Thurston had for their pitch in Las Vegas, which talks about the Forbes article that puts them in the 10 biggest kind of sporting events in the world. But it is a huge brand, and this is a huge difference maker. So something like All In, London will just consider another event. It's just another event. It's one night. Most of the people are coming in from either from the UK, predominantly from the UK, and some from Europe. But it doesn't have a track record. So the key with this is to have something that's been built up over years and years and years and years, where you can show its kind of economic impact. And when Sadiq Khan made the statements that he did prior to the mayoral election this year, when he said not only WrestleMania, but he talked about wanting to get NBA regular season games back in London to go with the NFL and the MLB games that we've had this year with MLB, last couple of years for MLB, last decade for the NFL. He talked about potentially getting another bid for the Olympics, which is what the press are focusing on when they interview him. I heard something on Sports Agents last week where they talked to him, and it was mainly focused around that. He's talking about the World Championship Boxing coming back with Dubois versus Joshua at Wembley Stadium, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But there is this thing. So he considers WrestleMania a major sporting event. That's why he mentioned it. And he's been talking about since the end of the pandemic that the key to London's turnaround in terms of coming back from the pandemic is bringing major sporting events to the capital. So he says that they're worth, over the 4 years prior to 2021, they were worth 2.5 billion, an average of 600 million in sporting events each year. And 2.27 billion of that is coming from accommodation and food and drink from visitors. So, and they look at it as, how much does it add per head? So a cultural event or a concert will add £23 per person to the London economy. A sporting event generates around £42 per person for the London economy. So this is a huge thing that he sees as part of London's kind of financial regeneration post-COVID in using these events. And we've used this previously. So there is this thing with London where they've always done that. It's always been part of the strategy. And it's, you think about, the Olympics. I was looking today at the IAAF World Championships, the Athletics World Championships in 2017. They paid, between them and UK Sport, £11 million to host those games, and they believe it brought in 70 million in income. So this is the direct economic impact. So you pay 10 million, you get 70 million back into your economy. And that's what they'd be looking for WrestleMania. So they will also have data. So when he made these statements, I know there's a lot of people that think that WWE have leverage because he made these statements. He's making these statements because their team have already done the cost evaluation on this.
Right. So
they know that, Clash at the Castle, the Welsh government, which is also Labour government, so Sadiq Khan is a Labour mayor, who's now, government of UK, government of Wales, not government of Scotland, to be clear. Get myself in trouble. SNP is still government of Scotland at the current time. And so they will know from the Labour government in Wales exactly how much they paid for Clash at the Castle, which is 2.6 million American. And they will know what the cost to benefit ratio was. So here's the direct impacts. here's the impact on the economy. They don't need one of these WWE run studies of Dallas or Las Vegas or anything like that. They will have that data from their own people. So they know the value of it. And something like WrestleMania, the key things about WrestleMania, and I thought about this when they did the Vegas pitch that Brandon got hold of, is it brings in people who don't come in for other sporting events. So they point out that their crossover with the NFL, with the NBA is, not that high. So these are people that wouldn't come into London for perhaps the athletics or football or anything like that. So, and the biggest thing for them is it brings in a huge amount of international travelers. So something like the World Athletics Championships, which they paid 11 million for, only 3% of those travelers were from outside of Europe, and only 5% were from Europe. The rest were all from the UK. WrestleMania will bring in a load more travelers from the US, from further afield. It always does. They always make that thing about, visitors from 65 countries. It's always on the...
Yeah.
But it's true. And visitors from further afield spend more money. So the average British person coming into the UK for a sporting event, this is a sports... I've got the another sporting agency survey, spend £62 while they're here. The average person from further afield, from Europe or other international countries, spends £150. So it's a huge difference, and that's what they're looking at. Do I think they would pay for it? Yes, I do. I think they've already looked at that. But also, it doesn't mean that money would have to come directly from them. So there is something else I've been looking at. So Ridge of Season, I don't know if you've seen it. So Terence Crawford, who's been over WWE television recently, he had a fight, last night in LA. And it was under the banner Ridge of Season, Crawford fight. And then there is the UFC at the Sphere coming up, which is being paid for as well by the Saudis. And it's also called Ridge of Season. No, I can't. I'm not doing that. My Mexican's awful. UFC 306, but it's under that banner. And we've also got this banner above Anthony Joshua and Dubois fights, which is at Wembley Stadium, which is going to be over maybe 100,000 people in Wembley Stadium. They've sold all the way round everything for that fight. And that one, interestingly, so he was actually challenged on partnering with Saudi Arabia, and he hasn't mentioned that. He talks about World Championship Boxing coming back to Wembley and coming back to the UK, but he's actually not mentioned that the Saudis are basically paying for it. And I thought that was interesting. And you can see it. So if you look at the promotional material for the Crawford fight, or you look at it for UFC, the Ridge of Season kind of branding is all over it. If you go onto the Wembley website and have a look at Dubois and Joshua, you won't see it until you actually click in onto the poster. So it's a lot more kind of scaled back. And I wonder how much that would be impacted. I mean, we've spoken about WrestleMania and potentially Saudi Arabia and then wanting a Saudi WrestleMania. Could the halfway point be to sponsor one to be in London?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge possibility of something that they could do. That money could come from there to play a part into that, the same way it is with that boxing event and the same way it is with UFC at the Sphere. So I wouldn't rule that out as being part of it as well. They are, London tends to work with commercial partners to kind of bring these events. And I wouldn't rule out that they don't have to spend $5 million American on it. Like Las Vegas did, because same way that you look at the CW deal with NXT, which decreases the value of AEW potentially in rights negotiations, they want to beat that that all-in number.
Yes,
they want
desperate.
They want that record, and this is why I think so. The biggest question is, I think they will pay for it. I absolutely now think they will pay for it. Looking at it. And they have a huge budget for these sort of things. And even when we're in these kind of trying times, we pay £2 million British for fireworks every year, for the same benefits, because it brings people in. They see it as it's going to generate the economy. It's all about bringing people in to generate the economy. Now that's what the mayor's office are looking at. But the bigger thing for them is going to be logistics. So I've seen suggestions around it being overnight, similar to where the UFC was in Manchester, which was an absolute disaster. Oh my God. Over 18s only. That is not going to happen. So WWE are only going to want Wembley because they want that record. There's nowhere else big enough in London. Okay. Wembley is a huge residential area, even more residential area had been built around it actually since it was rebuilt. And there is a curfew of 11 p.m. This is an open-air stadium. you are not ridding of that curfew on a Saturday and Sunday night. There is no amount of money in the world that's going to rid Brent Council to get around their residents of that curfew. It's not happening. They're struggling so much at the moment to try and increase the amount of events cumulatively for the year, and that's being pushed back. So that's not happening. So if it is going to happen, it would happen similar time to what All In is. That's how it's going to work, 2 nights. The other thing is that the problem that you have with Wembley is that Wembley is kind of it's a grass pitch and it doesn't move. So I don't know if you've ever seen the video. So we've got 2 pitches in Europe now: Real Madrid in obviously Madrid in Spain, and Tottenham Hotspur, which is not too far from Wembley in North London. And both the pitches, they can move the grass in and out.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
So it's kind of cool. It's kind of clever. And so Tottenham is kind of the most kind of high-tech stadium in the whole of London, but it's much smaller. If you ever go there, by the way, you'll get very friendly with a person next to you. The seats are very small. It's fun. But so they don't have that at Wembley. So then to use a kind of the pitch, you have to floor over it and you destroy the pitch. You don't have to relay it. And a time when WWE would normally go, so you think early April to mid-April, is right before the start of the kind of major parts of the football calendar. So you have FA Cup semi-finals, which are huge money spinners, and then you have series of finals, cup competitions, non-league, all the way through. And then they take that all the way through to June, and then they cut off for the concert season. So you're asking a huge expenditure to put that in during that time period. And then you've got the weather as well, because our weather is shit in April, let's be completely fucking honest. It's awful. So you've got so many other things to contend with there that I think it's now a logistical issue rather than a money issue. Yes. You probably didn't see that one coming.
I think it's clear that WWE wants to run London and wants to beat the Wembley number just, for the sake of it. And I know this isn't true, but I think even if Triple H had never heard the words Wembley Stadium before last year, now it's like, I'm sure it's right up there with places he wants to run. I'm always suspicious of corporations' numbers on we're going to bring in this much tourism and all this other stuff, but that said, what you've said makes complete sense. And I think some of the stuff we've heard, and we talked about it the last episode or the episode before, in terms of All In and Texas, make a lot of sense in this context.
For AEW, I think already, and I think, I'm quite bullish. I think they will get to 55,000 in distributed. Don't know about paid.
Yeah.
They had a big increase this week that was mainly driven by using the Blue Light program, which is a great program for emergency workers, NHS workers, to get basically comp tickets. So you can do more of that. They'll have lots of late promotion, much more than they did last year, to be able to distribute. There's still prices to be dropped. So last year they dropped a lot of the lower tier. They've still got half of the lower tier, the 100 tier on the hardcam side they can put on sale. So I do think they will get to 55 just out of logistics. But is that enough to then run Wembley again next year? It would be tough. So you would be better leaving that market fallow, and especially if WWE are coming in, don't do that to yourselves. Why put yourself in that position? If it's just pride or anything like that, go and look at other markets. And you see with this Cleveland thing, there is a potential of if there's potential to get into that kind of live event market where someone's paying you to be there, then that's what you should be looking at,
I don't like it as a taxpayer, but I don't as a if it's something that's doable, they should do it, right? If that's available to them, they should be taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think we like it as a taxpayer. I'm sure there'll be questions about how much they spend on if they get Wrestlemania in London, being the state of there's a lot of people that need help, especially in London. So there will be questions on that, absolutely. But I can see them doing it. I think logistics are much bigger problems. I think London would probably want them to use the Olympic Stadium, which is under the Mayor of London, and there's a big loss leader. That stadium, where West Ham play and where the baseball was. If you watch the MLB games from the Mets and Phillies this year, you'll have seen it. But they would probably rather have them in there. But I'm sure that WWE would pay for Wembley want Wembley. Wembley would incur the mayor's office having to pay a fee because the Wembley is actually owned by the FA, which is the Football Association in the UK. So it's slightly different. And that's why the idea, I think people say, they can move the football finals and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that ain't happening. No, it's it'd be like moving the NFL playoffs. It's just not happening. Not for wrestling. So that's kind of where that is. I think logistics is the big thing. Tax will be a big thing. So we lost the ATP finals here, the tennis finals that used to be here each year. They went to Turin, and then because of taxation issues in the UK. So that's something else that you'd have to sort out as well. So it's those sort of things rather than a base fee, I think, is the issue. But yeah, I do think AEW should pursue other things, should look at different things to try and do that. And, change is good in some ways as well, because it kind of invigorates things. We're doing something different rather than a third year at Wembley.
I don't think these things mean failure. I think it's just a question of let's try something new, right?
Yeah.
Some traditions are fine and some traditions are dumb.
There's a reason why people don't tend to do stadium shows in the same place each year. You try and build your market back up, that kind of, and it's the same thing with boxing at Wembley. So there's not been boxing at Wembley for a long time now. Hence, there's huge demand for this fight, which is not the most marketable fight out there. But that's how it works. You have to have that kind of fallow period. It's like farming, isn't it? God, I'm doing a farming analogy. Fucking hell. It's like a fallow field, and then you come back
rotate your 3 crops, Trish. You go from your grains to your vegetables. You got to leave one fallow. I remember all this. This is the medieval period. I'm all over it. Let's go.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Fucking closure.
Oh my god. Okay. Yeah. All right.
All right. So we had one question left, but I think given the time frame we have, and that it's a decent question. It's from our friend of the podcast, Brandon Van Candia. He asked us a good question, but I think I'm going to reach out to Brandon and say we're going to skip this one and see if he's willing for us to push it to the next episode, because I think it just gives us a little bit more time to answer it, because it's a question that deserves more than just something we could pop off in a few minutes. But the people who don't deserve more of an answer. I'm joking. For those of you that listen to our sister podcast, Tunnel Talk, today, Trish, and I am springing this on Trish as she has not had a chance to listen to them yet and doesn't know which question this is. They have talked about the idea that they have, obviously, that Tunnel Talk is the all facts, no facts, all feelings podcast, and often are like, hey, what about this fact? So their question today, which led them into wanting to know if we could do a question exchange program between the podcasts, which I'm super freaking into, by the way. I really want to know what questions they have for us, and I have a lot of questions for them. But their question is based around the curiousness of Jeff Jarrett being inserted so prominently into the main event scene. And Allie, I believe it was Allie, came up with, is she'd like to know if Jeff Jarrett is got any numbers in the demo that could account for his current placement in the main event scene as Bryan Danielson's only friend. How's he doing with the 18 to 34s, Trish?
Fuck's sake.
I thought you'd enjoy that.
I love how you didn't tell me beforehand. I was like,
no.
I was like, this is like, you were just like teasing me with it. I was like, this is just like when no one tells me, oh, we got you a Christmas present, but we're not going to tell you what it is. It's going in the cupboard. You're like, don't look.
The cupboard is full of Jeff Jarrett and his guitar. Bree woo.
This Brewer thing's really dead weird to me, because it's just like, I've listened to that theme for 15 years. It feels like 2002. What are we on now? Oh god, no, fucking hell, it's more than that. But it seems like when he started using it in TNA, and I just never thought of it like that. I just like what's his fingers like in the demo?
Banter for the end of the episode, kids.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So the page match did well. Yeah, everyone. Well, let's just assume that that quarter 7 did really well, did better than the main event, and the follow-on angle and the overrun. He's not really had major segments after that. He's kind of had 2 minutes and stuff. And I guess we'll see how the Danielson match does. I'm sure that'll be protected in some ways. Does he deserve the spot he's in? Jarrett can be quite clever. I've always liked Jeff Jarrett more than most people have. I don't know if you know this one. So when he was in TNA, people used to call him Triple J, because he was
yes.
He used to control the belt, kind of like Triple H did at the time. And it was he doesn't, and the Monty Brown thing and all that stuff. But I always kind of liked him more than most people did. I do think he's a very clever worker. He can, make a lot out of not very much at all. Jarrett, they did the storyline with, obviously, we talked about his relationship with Owen Hart in the tournament, and they kind of opposed him with Adam Page. And this is what happens when you're trying to protect everybody.
Yeah.
So, and it's, you can do that legend run, but I think people wanted more for Page after the momentum he came back with. We talked this to death, but I can see why that is. Yeah, he can do that kind of legend run. Does he deserve the position off his ratings? I don't fucking know. We're gonna do a deep dive into Jeff Jarrett.
She's oh.
It's like I'm gonna get the TNA pay-per-view numbers out from 2004.
I do love that Dave was like, he's got to win the whole Owen now. He gave one good promo. Like, Dave, what are you doing? It's Jeff Jarrett. I think that I'm happy that, like, at least on Collision last night, they were like, hey, Danielson has Yuta, and Yuta and he are friends, and like that's at least been better.
Oh, the BCC exists now in his story.
Yeah, now they exist. Yeah,
good.
Well, at least one of them does.
One of them does.
One of them does. So that's at least a positive. But yeah,
maybe we'll see the other ones back soon. Who knows?
Yeah, I feel like Jeff Jarrett's going to jump into that spot that Tony has rotated between a bunch of guys. Like Jay Lethal was that guy for a while, and then Shane Taylor was that guy for a while, where it's like his guy that everybody beats. Like he's on TV every week for like a month, and everybody beats him, and then they do that with somebody else.
Hey, look, if at the end of the day, it's not perfect for Page, but at the end of the day, if it keeps him heel and they don't cut his legs off further, then fine, fuck it. They'll manage. They'll do something. Strange thing. So I know there's been a lot of suggestions about that being the match at Wembley or All Out, and maybe I don't think they've changed what they're doing with Page about 4 times in the last few weeks. But it's it'd be an interesting thing to do after you did the no DQ thing with Danielson. I thought they were replacing that with that, but who knows? They'll figure it out. Or
they won't, and we'll have more things to discuss, Trish. Silver lining always.
We're going to have lots to discuss in September, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God. That'll be coming up on our year-long anniversary.
Oh my God, that's even scarier.
I know.
Scarier. A year since Leah bullied us into this.
Last time, Leah bullying us into doing a podcast.
Leah,
catalyst.
Leah is the catalyst, the decision maker.
Yeah, she's got plans and schemes, friends.
Yeah, I need
to be nervous.
I feel like I need to make a whole Jay White style thing for her.
I'm just gonna be the crazy person in front of the pictures and the strings pointing. All right. Well, those are our topics.
Oh, right.
Good show, Trish. Good show. Way to bring the heat.
Are we doing self-praise now? Is that a thing?
Why not? Please. Who else is going to praise us if we're not going to? Male podcasters, remember? We're the greatest podcasters in the history of the medium. Well, we're doing so much.
Well, we're getting a male podcaster treatment now. People make up things we say now, which is amazing.
Listen, you got to throw those adverbs in front. There's always an adverb describing an emotion that I possibly had.
That just reminds me, I have a friend in work, this is completely off topic and I don't care anymore, but hey, I have a friend in work who uses certain words as adverbs, nouns, that sort of thing. That's what you're making me remind me of. I just anyway, right, so completely
adverb for everything at work that I'm at is fucking.
yeah, basically it is. He's just like, this fucking train of Dave. Oh, he's so funny. I love him. I do miss him. Right.
Always saving this shit at the end, folks. We never put it at the top.
Just turn it off. You've had enough of me anyway.
Yeah, I fucking have.
One fucking year. That's enough, isn't it?
Divorced already.
We're like them Facebook couples that did all the pictures in the first 4 weeks. I love it so much. And now we're like.
Okay, now I want to do. I wish we had done. Sarah and Trish are having a podcast with what's the gender of the podcast? What's the podcast going to be about? With some kind of photo shoot on a beach. Oh,
it's a number. No,
it's about ratings.
All right, that's it. We've lost it. That's enough.
All right, we're done. We're done.
Yeah, that's your 2 minutes of banter. That's all you're allowed. 2 minutes of banter. Not allowed to be emotional. Don't shout. Nope. Don't do anything like that unless it's about MJF. What else is important? I don't know. Anyway, right, okay. So this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. We were serious for about 1 hour and whatever of this. So there you go. This is what you get. We are proud members of the Social Suplex Network. You can listen to all their great podcasts, including All Things Elite, Keeping It Strong Style, Imp's WWE Adventure, Wrestling Art with Chris Things, AEW Match Guide with Sam, and the infamous Tunnel Talk that made me ask questions about Jeff Jarrett's ratings data.
If you want to hear the conversation that led to the question being asked, I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah,
the gals were just freaking hilarious.
I'm going to that now, and I'm going to write a long diatribe in their channel.
We're going to have to come up with some questions for them, Trish. That's going to be the best part.
Revenge, huh? Yeah, okay. Right, this is going to be a thing now. This is like we need to get on the level of like the feud that they have with One Nation Radio with James. Right?
I can't be as nefarious as James.
No, but we need to up our game. Are we going to up our game?
It's true. No, I agree with that. I need to agree. I agree with that.
Amazingly, as we've just said that, our wonderful producer is Leah from Tunnel Talk, who we're now vowing revenge on.
Shit, we may not have thought this through.
Yeah, we may need to. We'll come back to that one. We'll come up with some strategies. But Leah is our savior and our sorter of absolutely everything, because we are absolutely useless for technology, decision making, or anything of the sort.
Creative decisions.
No, if we left me with creative decisions, it's just like I'd be just like, you know what, you come up with it. I'm going back to watching more table tennis or kayak cross. Kayak cross is awesome. Anyway,
pommel horse.
I didn't watch much of the pommel horse. Matt was did great, did he? I didn't see that. I was watching golf today. I was watching Tommy Fleetwood. Southall guy, I like him. Anyway, nice looking guy too. Anyway, right. This is the worst close I've ever done, I think, and I've fucked up so many of these. We've had to re-record them twice, so that's quite good, isn't it?
Yeah, but this one's my fault because I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, it is your fault. We'll just blame you.
It is.
Well, no, we're not. We're blaming Tunnel Talk. It's their fault.
Yeah, screw you guys.
Screw you guys. Anyway, you can also, if you do want to ask us questions or have any feedback, you can join the Social Suplex Discord. And for anything more direct, you can find us on Twitter, not X. Jesus Christ. You can find myself at Trish Spears 48. You can find Sarah at Sarah Grapp. So you can find the show podcast Twitter at Trish and Sarah at Trish and Sarah. You can also email us, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com. And just like Sean did today, we will answer your questions as we can. That has been it. In 2 weeks, we'll be back, and just be the week before All In. So that's going to be an interesting time. Hopefully, we've got a TV deal to talk about, because I can't deal with this much
please,
longer.
the Lord God Jesus.
That's it. So until then, I've been Trish.
I've been Sarah.
And this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for listening.